Hello, everybody, and welcome to New Consciousness Review. I'm Miriam Knight, and our guest today is Dr. Paul Jaminet, an astrophysicist and software entrepreneur. His wife, Shou-Ching, is a vascular biologist and cancer researcher on the Harvard Medical School faculty, and they have co-authored a book called Perfect Health Diet, 4 Steps to Renewed Health, Youthful Vitality, and Long Life. Well, who doesn't want that? So welcome, Paul.
Thank you for having me, Miriam. It's great to be here.
Paul, you and your wife developed chronic illnesses in your 30s and 40s that conventional medicine couldn't cure. Please tell us what happened and what that led to.
Well, I had some health problems, some minor health problems my whole life, but one of them was chronic acne. And in my late 20s, I took a year-long course of antibiotics for that, followed by Accutane. And while I was on the antibiotics, my health got significantly worse. I was a runner, and I slowed down tremendously. I developed rosacea. Doctors didn't recognize any of those symptoms, so I just accepted it. I was very busy at work, but things gradually got worse. I started to develop neuropathy. I had trouble keeping my balance. I would drop things, bump into things. I started having memory loss, and my mood was impaired. I wasn't nearly as happy as I had been before, and was more easily irritated. And I just didn't feel well, and everything. It seemed like every year things were a little bit worse. And my wife had a number of chronic health problems too, hypothyroidism. A lot of reproductive problems. She had endometriosis, uterine fibroids, ovarian cysts, acid reflux, and was somewhat depressed. And and again, she got no help from doctors. She had surgery, but it didn't fix anything. And in my case, I had quit working full-time in order to do some research and write a book, and I was finding that my cognitive issues were making it very difficult for me to work productively. And I decided, I was too young to be losing my mind, and I'd better focus on becoming healthy first and worry about all my other work. And the first thing I found that really made a difference was changing my diet. And, so in 2005, I tried a version of the Paleo Diet, and it had big effects, both good and bad. And I believe strongly enough in the evolutionary argument for that sort of diet that I was willing to stick through the bad effects and focused on learning how to refine it in order to get all the good effects without the bad effects.
And so, what were some of the bad effects?
Well, I had some chronic infections, and I had immediately a very strong flare-up of a candida fungal infection. To the point that one ear ballooned up and became red, and I had one of the things that happened after adopting a low-carb diet. I realized later, when this happened again when I went on antibiotics, I had a strong die-off of white blood cells that were infected with a bacterium that suppresses the natural apoptosis or cell death of white blood cells, which keeps them from becoming infected. And And so when I went low carb, they all died off, and the fungal, the candida, was able to make a systemic infection for a few weeks, which was pretty scary.
Yeah, it's almost the classic comment that the operation was a success, but the patient died.
Well, it was risky, and it was also very confusing. What was happening.
Right.
My doctor, his first impulse when he saw me was, it's a very dangerous cystitis, and he gave me antibiotics, which made the white blood cell die off worse. And so anyway, but that was the immediate problem. I also had some longer term problems, which were also due to the primarily to the candida infection.
So what's interesting here is that it's a bit like a detective story. You're trying to track down the initial cause, and then you find that there are so many interrelated effects that forced you and your wife to go more deeply into the science and kind of unravel all the connections.
That's right.
Your book was just so fascinating in that respect.
Yeah, so we attribute bad health to some combination of malnutrition, toxins, and infections. And most people have half a dozen to a dozen chronic infections. Most people are unaware of their infections. A typical person may have a dozen or 2 dozen nutrient deficiencies. And people get substantial amounts of toxins from their food and other environmental sources. And so a typical person has, maybe 40 things that are negatively impacting their health. And you can imagine all the different combinations, that can conspire to produce bad health. So, that's why doctors have so much trouble curing chronic diseases, because there's no single cause, usually. So there's no one intervention that makes a substantial difference.
And we're always looking for the magic bullet.
Yeah, so that's why we titled our book Perfect Health Diet. It's really about a strategy. You should aim for making your diet perfect. If you eliminate all of those instances of malnutrition, you eliminate toxins from your diet, you're taking away most of the causes of ill health. And then it becomes much easier to diagnose any infections you might have and to come up with appropriate treatments. So what we're really trying to provide is a strategy for becoming as healthy as possible. So, it's more a diet that's part of an approach to achieving perfect health or getting close to it.
So you tend to recommend that people start with the diet.
That's right.
What are the elements that you look at?
Well, the reason for starting with the diet is a healthy diet is very benign. It won't do you any harm, and it will do you a lot of good. It'll clarify a lot of symptoms. The trouble with starting with antibiotics and trying to attack infections is that if you're on a bad diet, there's a good chance they won't work. So there's kind of a tipping point in infections. If the infection can grow faster than you're killing it, then you won't get a cure from the drugs, and they may have side effects. And if the antibiotics aren't working, then it may lead you astray and lead you to misdiagnose your problem.
Well, the other thing about antibiotics is that they kill off the benign bacteria in your intestinal tract, which you actually need to create that's part of your immune system.
Yeah, that's right. So, drugs always have negative effects, and so it's much better to start with diet first. If you optimize your diet, you'll find that maybe you won't need any drugs, but if you do need antibiotics, then they'll work much better once your diet is good. So we do recommend starting with diet and nutrition first.
Well, let's stay with the diet for a moment. You said that you tried the paleo diet, and we've just had a number of people on who recommend the paleo diet. So you have a kind of a refinement on the paleo diet in that you recommend what you call safe starches. So first, can you give us the general guidelines for the diet that you recommend, and then perhaps how it differs from the paleo diet?
Yeah, so in general, our diet is a moderate carb, moderate protein, and relatively high fat diet. So we typically recommend getting maybe 20 to 30% of calories from carbohydrates, maybe 15% of calories from protein, and a majority of calories from fat. But the fats should be almost all saturated and monounsaturated fats. The diet should be very low in omega-6 fats, and you should have enough omega-3 fats to balance the omega-6 that you're bound to get. And you can do that by eating something like a pound a week of oily fish like salmon or sardines. And among plant foods, we favor getting mostly glucose. So starches digest to almost 100% glucose. Things like fruits and berries, it varies with the fruit or berry, but they'll typically digest to maybe 50% glucose, 50% fructose. We think a good diet should be mostly glucose, some fructose. So, a good diet might end up being 75 or 80% glucose and 20% fructose. So we recommend getting much of the carbs from starchy foods like potatoes or white rice, as opposed to a fruit-dominant diet, which is what many paleo authors recommend.
Mm-hmm. And certainly you start by eliminating sugars. You get your glucose from starch, right?
Yeah, that's right. There's really no good reason to eat added sugars. So we are relatively low carb compared to a typical American diet. So a typical American gets maybe 50% of calories from carbs. We're about half that. Mm-hmm. And but the other side is it's much healthier to get the carbs from food. So plant foods have a number of nutrients and a number of other benefits to them that you want to bring those benefits along with the calories.
Okay, let's talk about fats for a moment. You talk about saturated fats, so that includes animal fats like butter and fat from lard and fat from beef, but also you're a big fan of coconut oil. Why is that?
Well, coconut oil is one of the few natural sources of shorter chain fats. So human breast milk is about 10%. The fats are about 10% composed of these shorter chain fats, which go to the liver exclusively. They nourish the liver. The liver often exports their energy as things called ketones to the rest of the body. And ketones are beneficial for the central nervous system, neurons. They're neuroprotective. They'll tend to help keep your nervous system in good health and not aging so well. They can help protect your nerves from bacterial infections and things like that. So it's not bad to mimic the composition of breast milk and to get a little bit of these shorter chain fats in your diet. Mm-hmm. And coconut oil is probably the easiest and most readily available source of those.
Mm-hmm. And you did say that you prefer organic virgin coconut oil or cold-pressed coconut oil.
Yeah, in general, I mean, partly it's a matter of taste, but
it tastes better.
The less
I can attest to that. It definitely tastes better. Tell us about omega-6s versus omega-3s and why we should be avoiding most vegetable oils.
Yeah, well, those are the two classes of polyunsaturated fat. And polyunsaturated means it has at least two or more carbon double bonds. which are very fragile, chemically fragile. They're easily oxidized, and when they get oxidized, they turn into quite toxic compounds. And because they're so toxic, the cells of your body highly regulate these compounds. And also because they're so fragile, the body actually uses their oxidation. So, the evolution learns how to make lemonade out of lemons. And so when it has these fats that are fragile, it actually uses them as signaling molecules. Your cells intentionally oxidize them or allow them to be oxidized and use that as a signal of certain kinds of stress or infection and so on. And so they trigger inflammation. And if you flood your body with these fats so that you have an excess, cells try to keep the omega-6 level very low. So they're regulated to a certain amount, and that's important because it controls the downstream signaling of these oxidized polyunsaturated fats. And if you flood your body with them, which is what most people are doing because of the high intakes of vegetable oils these days, then people develop chronic inflammation and poor health. So these are not good structural elements for most cells. And if you eat more than your body can dispose of, then they build up, and they're a major cause of ill health. I think they're probably the primary cause of the obesity epidemic. So it's a big problem. And if you look at vegetable oils, soybean oil is about 57% omega-6. Corn oil is up to 80%. Safflower oil is like 75% omega-6. So most of the, nearly all the agricultural vegetable oils are very high in omega-6. So the healthy plant oils are all the tropical oils, like coconut oil, palm oil, olive oil, something from a warm climate. If it's something that grows in a northern climate, like wheat, corn, soybeans, then it's probably a very unhealthy oil.